big of an issue is financial literacy in America?
So, for much of the data that we have seen over the last 2 years, it is a much more severe problem than we thought it is. We have now many studies that look at different populations across different countries, and we find that simple financial problems like calculating percentages or understanding what compounded interest means, what happens to your money when your savings rate is below inflation, and questions like that are actually very difficult for people. And we find that actually in the United States, we seem to have lower financial literacy rate than in many other developed countries, in Europe, for instance. And this is a particularly problematic issue because our world has become much more financially difficult. Students like you need to take more and more debt. Then when you go out and you get a job, you need to be able to manage that debt, including starting saving for retirement, whereas your parents' generation might have a pension. From their work, the money you will have for retirement is the money you save, and therefore you need to manage current consumption, you need to manage your debt, and you need to manage savings for a variety of reasons: a house, graduate school, a car, and ultimately saving for retirement. So I think it's a tremendously big problem that we have to deal with.
Couldn't people be more financially stable if they just saved more and were smarter with their money? What behavioral factors prevent people from making preparations in the present for when they need money in the future?
People can definitely do a lot more. It's very, very simple. Most people have debt, and most people need to save for a variety of different reasons, but there is a fixed set of income coming in. And as long as people spend or have financial obligations that are less than what they're making, their life is simple. But what we see over time is that actually people have huge problems with it. So people think that how much money they have to spend is how much money they have on their credit cards is credit limit, which is not the case. So people seem to be, on average, taking more and more debt than they're then capable of dealing with. And the reasons are fascinating for a psychologist. We can think of the behavioral reasons in two big buckets. One is the effect of context, how the environment around us changes our behavior, influences our behavior, and we think of how we manage and we think about time. So let's start with context. One big reasons why managing our money is so difficult is because of the complexity of the decisions we need to make. We spend money on many, many different things. Some of them are more stable, like rent, transportation, tuition, but other are small and seem insignificant at the time. So buying another latte in Starbucks, or eating out for lunch instead of bringing a sandwich. All these decisions seem inconsequential in isolation, but they tend to be very, very influential over when you aggregate them across a month or across a year. And therefore, people are unable to see that these small little decisions have large effects over time. In terms of the financial decisions that we see that people are making, complexity is huge. So we now have so many things to choose from, and it's both in terms of what occupies our attention for purchasing, but also in terms of the things we can do with our money. So savings, we have so many different ways in which one can save their money, and sometimes it becomes overwhelming and people tend to avoid that. So context overall, we tend to have strong influences from the things around us, and we tend not to believe that they will have such a tremendous influence on our lives. So how products are being positioned, what do we see next to each other, what's called reference effect. So Is spending $10 on lunch a lot or a little? Well, that depends compared to what? Compared to how much I spend on groceries that I buy for 2 weeks, that seems very little, but compared to taking a sandwich from home, it is a lot. So again, how we think of money, how we think of kind of whether things are expensive or not has to do with what we see next to them. The next piece that comes that makes life very difficult for most consumers in terms of how we manage our money has to do with how we think about time. We tend to be what's called myopic individuals. So we have this concept called hyperbolic discounting that, without getting too technical, the idea is that I care more about things now compared to later than in any other period. So giving up consumption today is more painful than giving up consumption at any other point in time, which leads people to say, I'm just going to spend a little bit more today, I'll spend less next month, because you don't have this empathy towards your future self. And there are many, many interesting studies now about the fact that people think of their future self as almost a different individual. And it's a different individual that you don't care deeply about. So do I save for the future instead of consuming today? People say, I really want this now. I'll worry about the future later. And there's actually nice research to show that when you actually, through different software manipulation, give people an aged picture of themselves, they tend to save more for retirement. So, for instance, you're willing to give up more of your current consumption towards that future event because you care more about that person. So it's you think of sort of how connected you are to your future self. The other piece of it is what I call slack, and that comes from some of my own research. People are just optimistic about the resources they'll have in the future. They believe that they'll have more time next month than they have this month. They believe that they'll have more money available next month compared to this month. So why do we procrastinate? Why do we think we won't complete that paper today? Or we're not going to set up that saving account today. We're going to do it at some other time in the future, is because we believe that we have more time in the future than we have right now. We don't foresee all these little events that eat up our time or that crowd our schedules. That is also true for money. I'm not going to save this month because I'm really, really crunched. I have all these expenses that are very, very salient. But I will save at some point in the future because I don't see all these other competing things I need to do with my money. So we always believe we're going to have more of a resource in the future compared to now. And that perception leads us to say, I'm just going to do it at some other point in the future.
What advice would you give to a spendthrifter who wants to spend less but has trouble saying no when they see something they want?
So this applies to almost everybody. Many of us, if not all of us, spend a little bit more than we would like to, and on things we don't like to. And it goes back to context. The availability of products is incredible. Even if we're able to avoid the mall, not to be tempted by this new gadget, we still are on our computer and we go to Amazon.com or any other website. So things are just available and they're in front of us, and it's very, very difficult to avoid temptation. The easiest thing I believe for most people to deal with is set rules. We don't like rigid rules, but rigid rules work. So set budget for certain categories. Say I'm not going to spend more than $20 a month on coffee out. Or say I'm not going to go to more than one movie a week. Or I'm not going to buy more than that many songs on iTunes per month. So set up very, very specific rules and you'll be able to manage your money a lot better. You can, again, this applies to the notion of, it's a rule of I don't go to a mall more than once a month, or to setting budget, which is this is the maximum I'm willing to spend on a category. It's also about rules such as from any paycheck I get, 10% goes to savings. So you're not forced to make a decision every time you get a paycheck, but you have a set rule of this is what's going to happen, and it doesn't require me to rethink that decision every time, every event or every paycheck or every time I go to the mall, because I've decided ahead of time what I'm going to do. And again, it's not like we can always follow these, but when we have a rule, it at least prevents us from doing things we don't want to do.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.